Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a fascinating and, frankly, pretty chaotic stack of sources in front of us today.
Utterly chaotic.
Yeah, they somehow managed to connect this really everyday local activity like how to dig for shellfish with these huge, sweeping, catastrophic global forecasts.
Yeah, economic collapse, geopolitical shifts,
Yeah,
even UFOs get thrown in there.
exactly. So our mission today is to basically treat these documents like they're serious predictive models, and
Yeah.
try to figure out why the authors would link something like the mechanics of local clamming to the fate of the entire global banking system.
It's definitely a deep dive into forecasting extremes.
Yeah.
These sources, they kind of blend three really distinct narratives, right? You've got
Yeah.
the inevitable economic crash they predict.
Right.
Then there's the whole geopolitical angle, the U.S. dollar losing dominance, the, quote, American empire sort of fading.
Okay.
And then this major wild card comes in UFO disclosure. So we really need to focus on the author's internal logic, how they try to weave all these threads together.
Okay, and it seems like their story kicks off right there on the coast with this really specific, detailed account of a recent, 9-day winter storm.
Yeah, this source describes this relentless mix, rain, snow, hail, sleet, just nasty weather.
But even with all that, apparently there was a clam tide. People went out.
Which brings us straight to the complexity of razor clamming. It sounds simple, maybe, but it needs this very specific tool. Locally, they call it a clam gun.
Which is not a weapon. We should probably stress that.
Right. No, definitely not a weapon. It's just essential gear.
So can you explain how this thing actually works?
Right.
Because the mechanics seem pretty important for the metaphor they build later on.
Sure. So the clam gun, it's basically an aluminum tube, usually about maybe 4 to 6 inches across, and it's connected to a sturdy T-handle.
Okay.
Now, that T-handle has this small but really crucial air hole. The process is you spot the clamshell with a little dimple in the sand.
Right.
You jam the tube down into the wet sand around it. Then, and this is key, you seal that little air hole with your thumb.
To create suction.
Exactly. Creates a vacuum.
Hmm.
Then you pull up, and you lift out this entire column of wet sand. And hopefully, the razor clam is inside it.
And these things can be big, right?
Oh, yeah, massive sometimes.
Hmm.
The source mentions up to a foot long.
Wow. Okay, so it's pretty intense manual labor, harsh conditions, but then the sources immediately pivot, don't they? They use the danger of clamming as this analogy for global financial risk.
Precisely. There's this local dark humor, this joke about people going missing because the great clam takes them.
Which is usually, tragically, a euphemism for drowning.
Often, yes. And it's usually caused by these unseen features in the sand.
You mean the wells?
Exactly, the wells. These are like deep channels cut into the sand, running parallel to the coast. You just can't see them from the surface.
You could be walking in, say, 2 feet of water, feeling totally safe.
And then suddenly, the sand just drops out from under you, maybe 3-4 feet down instantly into one of these wells.
And if you're wearing those heavy clam waders...
They fill instantly with water. You're pulled down. It's a sudden structural failure that turns a routine thing into a potentially fatal hazard.
Okay, so this invisible drop-off, this well, that's the hidden local danger.
And the authors explicitly draw the parallel. They say this is the nature of the global banking collapse they foresee. It's the sudden, unseen structural vulnerability hidden just beneath the surface of what looks like routine stability. And they think it's about to trigger a global crisis.
They actually predict we're heading really fast towards a moment of what they call maximum emotional intensity, which they dramatically nickname the Big Ugly.
Yes, the Big Ugly.
Okay, let's unpack the timing and the intensity here. The forecast timeline suggests this chaotic period is set to peak right around May and June. Is that right?
That's the window they give, yes. May and June for the peak intensity.
And the trigger, what sets it off?
According to the documents, it's going to be explicitly economically pushed, triggered by a crash involving basically all global economies simultaneously.
Wow. Okay. And what's really fascinating, you mentioned this earlier, is the projected duration of the emotional fallout.
Yes, that's a key point in their analysis. You know how many manufactured crises, they sort of spike quickly in the news, then immediately drop off?
Yeah, the news cycle moves on.
Right. But the sources here suggest that the peak of this angst and anxiety, which they think will be reached around, say, June 15th to the 18th, it's not expected to just dissipate.
It doesn't just fade away.
No. It's predicted to hold at that really high level for several months, which suggests, an actual ongoing non-manufactured crisis. Something real is keeping the pressure on.
That seems like a crucial distinction. How does the source justify thinking this will be a real sustained crisis, not just some short, maybe even controlled market adjustment?
Well, they link it directly to what they see as the structural failure of the U.S. dollar itself. The documents argue that this economic collapse signifies the end of the American empire control mechanism, as they put it. So, because they believe the foundation of the U.S. dollar is fundamentally broken, the crisis that follows can't just be patched up with, short-term stimulus or distractions. It's systemic, in their view.
And in this scenario, are there winners? Do the sources point to anyone benefiting?
They do. They get pretty specific, actually. They assert that many countries are acting like the smart guys, as they say, by actively de-dollarizing, basically bailing on the old system before it collapses.
Okay, like who? Do they name names?
Yeah, the document cites several regions they see as successfully making this pivot, and therefore are positioned as good players in this model.
Right.
They mention Russia, Siberia, Indonesia, Malaysia.
Hmm.
And the Philippines gets a specific mention too. It's singled out as shifting significantly toward all cash transactions, specifically to get away from the dollar system.
And this financial collapse, it's predicted to cause major institutional fallout too, right? Going way beyond just market corrections.
Absolutely. The timeline laid out suggests the UN, for example, is basically going to disappear as the dollar dies.
Disappear. Why?
Well, the reasoning given is that the U.S. will no longer be able or perhaps willing to foot the bill for it. And without that funding, what the authors call a global control mechanism just sort of dissolves.
Okay. And there are deeper claims too about the very foundation of modern finance.
Yes. The source claims that something like 100+ years of corruption in modern banking is about to be just wiped away.
100 years.
Yeah. And it draws this historical and philosophical line between modern finance and what it calls the ancient Babylonian system.
Okay.
And then it connects that further to a group described in the source material as the Kazarian Mafia.
Okay, wait a second there. We need to pause on that specific term for listeners maybe not familiar with this line of thinking. How exactly do the documents we have frame or define this Kazarian Mafia group, especially in the context of global banking corruption? I just want to be clear, we're reporting the source's claim, not endorsing it.
Absolutely. Impartial reporting is crucial here. So the authors frame this group as sort of an ancient, hidden criminal network. And they believe it operates through the mechanism of centralized banking.
Okay.
And according to the source, this network is responsible for perpetuating this long-standing Babylonian economic system, basically, debt and control over global governments. So the source views the coming collapse as the necessary eradication of this entire debt-based mechanism.
Right. So if that whole debt mechanism collapses, if the banking system basically becomes irrelevant like they predict, what fills the gap? How do people conduct transactions in daily life? Because, trade doesn't just stop because banks do.
Good question. The model suggests a really rapid, almost necessary shift toward a total cash society. They argue that cash is king will become the public mantra, basically.
So physical cash.
Physical cash, yeah, but also it's seen as this broader move towards non-institutional forms of transaction, which, interestingly, they say also includes various cryptos.
Ah, okay. Why cryptos too?
Specifically, the source suggests, as a way to circumvent the perceived government push for a central bank digital currency, a CBDC, people will look for alternatives they control.
Interesting. Okay, so that brings us to the predicted future for the U.S. itself. Despite being, the epicenter of the dollar's decline in this model, the source is surprisingly optimistic. It predicts this will actually be a good time for the USA in terms of rebuilding.
It sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, that's the forecast. The theory presented is that the rebuilding process itself will foster a sense of accomplishment, satisfaction, and effective positive change.
How so?
They argue it moves the nation away from what the authors describe as a negative, sort of atheistic view of the world. The relevance here ties back to their core economic philosophy. The source claims that without the banking system constantly, siphoning off resources, economies will actually boom.
So the argument is that people generally don't really need banks. It's mostly governments that need them for managing massive debts and control.
That's the core argument.
Yeah.
And they try to back this up with historical comparisons.
Like what?
Like, they remind us that most people throughout most of history, even during huge, thriving civilizations like ancient Egypt or Babylonia, they didn't interact with institutional banks the way we do today.
Fair point.
The claim is that the true drivers of commerce, The small, local economic activities, person-to-person trade, will actually flourish once this systemic jet burden they describe is lifted.
Okay. This is where it gets really interesting, though. Our predictive model takes this sharp, almost dizzying turn, right, from structural economics straight into the cosmic.
Yeah, it's a huge shift.
Right as we hit that projected peak of economic angst, around June, the public focus is predicted to immediately diffuse, shift away towards UFOs and space aliens.
And potentially absorbing attention all the way through maybe September.
The sheer magnitude of that predicted shift is, well, it's stunning.
It really is. And the sources actually spend some time speculating on the why behind that specific timing.
What's their theory?
The prediction is that the very same forces they described earlier, the ones they termed the Kazarian Mafia, might deliberately bring out the space alien narrative, or maybe just allow the disclosure of existing information.
Why? Why?
Precisely because, according to the source of their lack of control resulting from the massive economic collapse, it becomes the ultimate distraction.
Yeah.
Like the final systemic distraction from total financial ruin.
Wow. Okay. And the source claims this. This arrival of UFO disclosure will lead to something called the Great Derailment.
Yes.
It predicts this event will totally derail, that's the phrase they use, what it terms the cosmic climate change scam, rendering all the money and political effort currently poured into it totally irrelevant.
Yeah, they get specific with examples, too. They use the example that this kind of cosmic event would cause certain, high-profile figures, they mentioned Bill Gates by name, to lose all credibility instantly.
Why would they lose credibility?
Well, the implication is, if we suddenly have verifiable existential evidence of non-human intelligence operating here, who's going to be focused on, say, incremental environmental policy adjustments?
Right. The scale's just completely different.
Exactly. The source suggests the scale of the cosmic revelation simply overwhelms the current prevailing narratives of global concern, makes them seem small, almost quaint by comparison.
And this information is all connected somehow. The UFO data, archaeology.
Yes, they link it. The emerging UFO datasets are connected directly to deeper archaeological findings and specifically to Antarctica.
Antarctica again.
Yeah. The prediction is that whatever material of revelation is linked to Antarctica might gain widespread validity among the general public. The source calls them the normies, sometime around 2025.
So it's a forecast of simultaneous global financial and existential novelty happening at the same time.
Pretty much. You got two unprecedented, massive, simultaneous changes predicted. The structural end of the American empire model and its financial system, immediately followed by a cosmic revelation that completely upends our scientific and political focus. It's an overwhelming scenario to contemplate.
Which brings us right back down to the individual, doesn't it? The person trying to weather this massive storm, or maybe trying not to fall into one of those hidden wells.
Exactly.
The sources really emphasize the critical importance of individual action in this chaos, doing the little tiny stuff constantly, as they put it, to sustain civilization, to sustain the nation you actually want to see rebuilt.
But they also say this requires a specific internal shift to even be able to deal with the chaos.
What kind of shift?
It's described as this necessary personal shock. They call it the shock of the noob, like a newbie suddenly waking up.
Okay.
And this shock is supposed to make the individual become aware of their own psychological processes, how they react, how they think. It forces the individual to shift their self-awareness outside himself and his actions.
Outside himself, what does that mean?
It means including their own actions and reactions in their field of view, in their thinking. Not just reacting blindly, but observing themselves reacting. It's about becoming critically self-aware of one's own role and responses within this massive global shift.
Okay, that definitely raises a really important question, maybe something for you, the listener, to mull over or explore on your own after this.
Which is?
How do individuals actually maintain focus on constructive rebuilding? On executing that essential little tiny stuff? Consistently, when faced with such overwhelming simultaneous crises, economic collapse on one hand and profound existential novelty like aliens on the other.
Yeah, when the deepest systems on Earth, and maybe even beyond Earth, seem to be unraveling all at once, where do you find your anchor?
Right. Where do you find that anchor for consistent constructive action in the middle of all that? Something to think about.